Good morning, Ron. Morning, Erica.
Good morning.
You two guys are always the first ones in. Big yawn. Well, in 7 school days, you guys can have 2 weeks off.
That's good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Morning, Knox.
Good morning.
Morning, Lucy. Morning, Courtney. Morning, Sam. Morning, Noah. Morning, Allison. Morning, Andrew. Morning, Hannah. People waking up slowly this morning. Good morning. Morning, Makiko. Morning, Archer. Ricky. Morning, Leo.
Good morning.
I love you guys. It is good morning. You guys are all so sleepy. Come on, where's the coffee? Morning, Kaylin. Yeah, I'm going to wait a minute or more, or two longer. Let other people join. Morning, Christian. Okay, good. Morning, Ava. Have I missed anybody?
Mr. Gotchel.
Yes. Good morning. Oh, so Knox, you're watching me in real time and then with a 5-second delay?
It's more like a minute, actually.
Oh, okay. So that's weird. So yeah, the district actually reached out to us because I was saving all of my videos to Zoom's memory bank, and Zoom got in touch with the district saying, you guys are filling us up. So they want us to go back to YouTube. And now with instruction, figured out how to do it. It's probably better because on YouTube, you guys can have closed caption. And so the closed caption can misspell the words that I'm saying.
It's really funny to see because I just have it up on my phone, and then right next to it is my iPad.
You know, whatever gets you through the morning. Well, it's 34. So, and there's 19 of you guys, so we might as well get started. Good morning, y'all. I promised, and I'm going to deliver, we're going to talk about Seneca Falls today. But just so that y'all remember, this is what we were looking at last class, how all this huge chunk of America suddenly became America and not Mexico anymore. But now we are going to go to right about here, which is Seneca Falls, New York. So back to the East Coast. And I'll say that not entirely, but a good part of the stuff we'll be looking at moving forward is not just the examples of racial bigotry that we exhibited in this country, but also a lot more about the resistance and how people fought back. And this is a perfect situation for that, to describe a kind of organized resistance. So first, I'm going to start by showing you something that I showed you a while back, having to do with the status of women in the 19th century. I stopped. It's a very long PowerPoint. It goes all the way up into the 20th century. So I'm going to revisit a section. You'll remember some of it, but then I'm going to move a little further forward into places that I didn't, slides that I hadn't shown you before. And this is sort of to set the stage. So where is it? Preview. Hold on. You're here. I know you are. Here we are. Boop. So early 19th century women. And I do recall last time I showed this, there were some students that said, wow, this is really making me angry, which is an appropriate response, honestly. So women were unable to vote, had the legal status of a minor, even if you are 45 years old. Single, could own her own property, but married, no control over her property or her children. It goes over to her husband. Could not initiate divorce. Couldn't make wills, sign a contract, bring suit in court without her husband's permission. Now, if she stayed single, she could do all those things. But once you get married, then suddenly you are out of luck. The cult of domesticity took over. A woman's sphere was in the home. It was, of course, the refuge from the cruel world outside where men went. Her role was to civilize and educate her husband and her family. So, you know, because men are men and kids are crazy. So it's the woman's role to civilize and make them into decent human beings, which without her, of course, they couldn't be. And 1830s Massachusetts minister said, the power of women is in her dependence. A woman who gives up that dependence on man to become a reformer yields the power God has given her for her protection, and her character becomes unnatural. That's in the 1830s. The Second Great Awakening happened, which of course was a religious revival. And the religious revivals of the 19th century are very different than the religious revivals of the 20th century and the 21st. These people would be considered evangelical, but evangelical of 19th century is evangelism that believes you have to prepare earth for Jesus' return. And right now it's too ugly and messy. And so we have to improve things here before Jesus is going to agree to come back. So we need to fix things first, and which is a very different attitude of evangelical today, which is more about saving souls because the devil has primary run of the planet. So these guys are reformers. The Grimke sisters were both born into a Southern plantation. So their family owned slaves, and their religious experience told them that slavery was evil, and they left their families and they became abolitionists. And Lucy Stone, American Women's Suffrage Association, she started it and edited Women's Journal, but again, motivated by her religious belief. Between 1820 and the Civil War, which is 1860, the growth of new industries, businesses, and professions helped to create in America a new middle class. Small, but growing. Middle class consists of families whose husbands worked as lawyers, office workers, factory managers, merchants, teachers, physicians, others. Work is moving out of the house and into professional establishments and factories. More about the cult of domesticity. Although the new middle class family had its roots in pre-industrial society, it differed from pre-industrial family in three ways. A 19th century middle class family did not have to make what it needed in order to survive, didn't have to make it themselves. Men could work in jobs that produced goods or services while their wives and children stayed at home. When husbands went off to work, they helped create the view that men alone should support the family. This belief held that the world of work, the public sphere, was a rough world where a man did what he had to in order to succeed, and it was full of temptations, violence, and trouble. And of course, bars at this time were only men. A woman who ventured into such a world could easily fall prey to it, for women were weak and delicate creatures. Women's place was therefore in the private sphere, in the home, where she took charge of all that went on. So the men are the exterior face of the family, and women are the interior face of the family. The middle class family came to look at itself and the nuclear family in general as the backbone of society. Kin and community remained important, but not nearly so much as they had once been. The new ideal of womanhood and a new ideology about the home arose out of the attitudes about work and family, called the cult of domesticity. It is found in women's magazines, advice books, religious journals, newspapers, fiction, everywhere in popular culture. This is how you need to be. This new ideal provided a new view of women's duty and role while cataloging the cardinal virtues of true womanhood for a new age. Now, what this is, in part, is an adoption of what upper class society has been doing for quite a while. If you've ever read any books from the Middle Ages or the Victorian era, they always praised women that had ivory white skin. Well, you only have ivory white skin if you never go out in the sun, right? So anybody who was lesser than upper class in a pre-industrial society, everybody had to work. Everybody has something to do. You have to get outside and you have to do your stuff, which of course means that you're exposed to the sun, so you don't have that ivory white skin. So therefore you're tainted by that. So now that there is this professional class of work that provides enough income to support a family, the fact that women didn't have to go outside the house, mostly into the farmyard, to work anymore, means that inside the house becomes her specific domain. And now she too can have that ivory white skin. I mean, she may have to scrub the bathtub, but the fairer sex here becomes much more emphasized. And popular culture is all leaning into this. So they're just trying to replicate in a middle class sense what the upper class has been doing for quite a while. The new ideal provided a new view of women's duty and role while cataloging the cardinal virtues of true womanhood for a new age. And you can see there's an illustration, no time for politics because you've got your daughter on your lap. So this ideal of womanhood, essentially 4 parts, 4 characteristics any good and proper young woman should cultivate. Piety, so your religious purity, domesticity, and submissiveness. So notice in this that there's a lot of denial. Ambition is not a part of this. Piety. 19th century Americans believed the women had particular propensity for religion. The modern young woman of the 1820s and 30s was thought of as a new Eve, working with God to bring the world out of sin through her suffering, through her pure and passionless love. So yeah, Eve got Adam to bite the apple, but now we're trying to walk it back. Purity, female purity was also highly revered. Without sexual purity, a woman was no woman, but rather a lower form of being, a fallen woman, unworthy of the love of her sex and unfit for their company. Domesticity, women's place was in the home. Woman's role was to be busy at those morally uplifting tasks aimed at maintaining and fulfilling her piety and purity. And submissiveness, this was perhaps the most feminine of virtues. Men were supposed to be religious, although not generally. Men were supposed to be pure, although no one could really expect it. Men were never supposed to be submissive. Men were movers and doers, the actors in life. Women were to be passive bystanders, submitting to fate, to duty, to God, and to men. And I have to say that that's not just Western culture either. There's many places that supposed virtue was dominant. Changes in American life during the Industrial Revolution, division between work and home. So former domestic work, newer work. And some women actually did go to work in those factories, especially in New England. The demand for women's suffrage emerged in the first half of the 19th century from within the other reforms, like education for women. Emma Hart Willard in 1821, she opened the first endowed institution for the education of women, Troy Female Seminary in Troy, New York. So this is taking one of the things that women are supposed to be, which is religious, but tying it to education. And it's still there. The Temperance Crusade. I think I mentioned this. People drank an astonishing amount of alcohol in the 19th century. It's amazing, probably contributed to a shortened lifespan because I can't imagine all of their livers could handle it. But so temperance societies arose, mostly organized by women, because it was men that largely were getting smashed. And, a really drunk guy is not necessarily good company in the home. And so women organized to fight that. And almost simultaneous to women getting the vote in 1920 was the outlawing the sale of alcohol. So both of those motivated by women activists. The first wave of feminism, the major demand of the first wave was the right of women to vote. Women's suffrage, women wrote, lectured publicly, and organized to achieve the aim. And suddenly this gives women a different perspective on the world. So the women's rights movement in 1840, there was a split in the abolitionist movement and over women's role in it. In London, there was the World Anti-Slavery Convention. Lucretia Mott went, Elizabeth Cady Stanton went, and that's where they met. And these are the two women that are key in organizing what happens in Seneca Falls. So Susan B. Anthony and Amelia Bloomer attended the New York State Men's Temperance Society. So even some men were working for less alcohol consumption, meeting while wearing short hair and bloomers, which is very unfeminine. The radical abolition movement, and we will get to abolition right after we look at Seneca Falls. We'll look at the abolitionists. The radical abolition movement had the greatest impact on women's rights. Women in the abolition movement recognized parallels between the legal condition of slaves and that of women. Participation in the anti-slavery movement helped women develop public speaking and argumentative skills that carried over into the women's rights movement. And so Clarina Irene Howard Nichols, abolitionist and first feminist of Kansas Territory. My guess is she was tough as nails. So the Anti-Slavery Almanac for 1840, white and black women were excluded from full membership in the Anti-Slavery Society until 1840. So women responded by forming their own female auxiliaries. By 1838, over 100 existed. The Grimke sisters, nationally prominent abolitionists, connected the inequalities of women, both white and black, with slavery. Remember, they came from a plantation family, so they knew about slavery. 1840, the World Anti-Slavery Society in England denied women delegates the right to speak. Elizabeth Cady Stanton attended the 1840 Anti-Slavery Convention, and her experience led her into the struggle for women's rights. We resolved to hold a convention as soon as we returned home and to form a society to advocate the rights of women. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton was actually born into a very well-to-do family, and she was pretty well educated. She lived in Seneca Falls, New York. So she's a bit of a blue blood, which both is sometimes a burden, but it's an advantage in that it gave her the ability to travel and gave her the education where she could sort of appreciate things from a larger perspective. And there's a really terrible picture of Lucretia Mott. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott met in 1848 to organize a convention to promote the social, civil, and religious rights of women, which is the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention. And this is one of the statements from the Declaration of Sentiments. And see if you recognize where this comes from. The history of mankind, it is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. Does that sound familiar at all? Okay, I'm assuming you guys are still paying attention. Does that sound familiar, that sentence? Does it ring a bell?
No.
Stay tuned, it ought to. There's a very specific reason why they chose the language that they were doing. Where did I? Back to the PowerPoint. He has never permitted her to exercise, here we go, her inalienable right, where have you heard inalienable right, to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she has no voice. And Makiko, thank you. And it's in the chat. Makiko says, Declaration of Independence? Absolutely. They modeled their statement of the Declaration of Sentiments right off of the Declaration of Independence, which is kind of an act of genius. And we're going to look actually at the Declaration of Sentiments. So just a little bit more on this PowerPoint. The 14th Amendment, which is post-Civil War, The 14th Amendment to the Constitution added male to its definition of eligible voters. Women would need another amendment explicitly granting them the franchise. The 14th Amendment gives male African Americans, former slaves, the right to vote, gives them citizenship, but does not grant women. So very, very frustrating for the women. So the demand for women that suffrage presented a vision of independent women that seemed to threaten social structures. So they're not going to be sitting necessarily all day with the babies. They're out rabble rousing in that dangerous, rough world outside. The Seneca Falls Convention was the birthplace of the women's rights movement. And worth noting, it wasn't just women who attended the Seneca Falls Convention. This is Frederick Douglass, a former enslaved person. He was enslaved in Maryland, which is very, very close to the Mason-Dixon line. And he got into a fight with his overseer. His overseer said some unkind things to him, and Frederick Douglass nailed him with a couple punches. And then, knowing what would be the result of that, Frederick Douglass split and fled and managed to escape. And check this, as an enslaved person, he was not educated. He educated himself and became an incredibly articulate and powerful abolitionist. He actually became such an effective abolitionist that he met with Abraham Lincoln. So a former slave is meeting the president. He went to the Seneca Falls Convention in support of women, because he gets it. He understands the linkages. So before the war, Black and white men and women worked together for women's rights and the abolition of slavery. So the two have a linkage. There's another guy, William Lloyd Garrison. I'll show you his picture in a little bit. He published a newspaper called The Liberator, which was expressly fighting slavery. So he was a major abolitionist. And he also went to the anti-slavery convention in London. And when he learned that Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were not allowed to sit in the main room with the men, nor allowed to speak, he went and sat with the women. So some of the men actually walked the talk and saw the connections as well. It's called intersectionality. So I'm going to stop this because we're not getting to the Civil War yet. So I'm going to show you the pictures of those two guys. So this is Frederick Douglass again, and this is close to the age that he was. He was either in his late 20s or early 30s, quite a dashing guy. So that's him, and he went to the convention, Seneca Falls, and this is William Lloyd Garrison, a very big firebrand. And so both of them went to the Seneca Falls Convention in support of their purposes. I want to show you one more thing. Actually, let me show you just so you can see it. Oops, do I have it set up? 1 second, apologize. So, So let me show you the Canvas page so that you can find all this stuff. So everything I'm showing you, so the slides I was showing you is right here. And I'm going to show you this thing called female inferiority, which is quite enlightening. And then I'm going to show you some pictures of the actual place in Seneca Falls where it happened. And then this right here is the Declaration of Sentiments. So we'll see if we get through all this. We may not, which is fine with me. And then I will have you guys have some homework out of this, but we won't get to it today. We'll probably get to that on Monday. But so anyway, all of the stuff is in, and just so you can see where it is, these are the modules down, 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 down. So there's Seneca Falls right here. So that's what I was just showing you. And then the assignment is going to come here. And I'm actually looking forward to that, to how you guys do that assignment. But for the time being, we won't get to that today. I'm going to show you this thing about female inferiority. It goes along with the cult of domesticity. And so all of those of you who identify as female, I really want you to wrap your head around this. Now, remember that at this time, that's not what it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to be there. And you're not supposed to be there either. And I'm going to show you next. Okay, that share did not go to the right place. Come on, come on. Let's do this. There we go. And I want you to see where this comes from. This source of this is the National Institute of Health, National Library of Medicine, National Center for Biotechnology. So this is a real deal. And whenever you see something that says abstract, that means it's out of a scientific paper. So, and an abstract is just a condensation of whatever research was done that is much more involved. It shows data and such. So this is just a condensation of it. So a review of the prominent late 19th century biological writings, so this is done by scientists of the 19th century, reveals that a major plank of early evolutionary theory was the belief that women were intellectually and physically inferior to men. Female inferiority was a logical conclusion of the Darwinian worldview because males were believed to be exposed to far greater selective pressures than females, especially in war, competition for mates, food, and clothing. Conversely, women were protected from selection. You remember that Massachusetts minister is that, you are under the protection of your mate and of course of God. So women were protected from selection by norms that required adult males provide for and protect women and children. Darwinists taught that as a result of this protection, natural selection operated far more actively on males than on females, producing male superiority in virtually all intellectual and skill areas. As a result, males became more evolved than women. The women inferiority doctrine, that's a heck of a word, is an excellent example of the fact that armchair logic has often been more important in building Darwinism than fossil and other empirical evidence. In other words, this inferiority doctrine is just simply a scientific cover over a whole series of assumptions and biases that in fact have no scientific basis, but was accepted back in the 19th century. Now, of course, we know that that's hogwash, but this is the world that Seneca Falls took place in. This is the belief that they're pushing up against. So one last thing I want to show you, which is about Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott and their relationship. And these are two women that took a long time to get their sort of historic due. They, now they're in the pantheon of great Americans, but it took a long time. So there is a painting of Lucretia Mott. Looking a lot better here than in that photograph that you saw. Made her look kind of ghoulish. And this is a photograph actually of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And she did have 7 children. And this is the two of them together. And actually, and this is one of those photographs that, they pose and like hold still. They probably had to stand like spot still, which is why they look a little stiff, because the exposure here was multiple seconds. Actually, with Susan B. Anthony, sorry, and there's a Susan B. Anthony was on our $2 coin, which didn't really circulate very well. The prejudice against color, of which we hear so much, is no stronger than that against sex. It is produced by the same cause and manifested very much in the same way. So prior to living in Seneca Falls, Elizabeth Cady Stanton had become a great admirer and friend of Lucretia Mott, the Quaker minister, feminist, and abolitionist, whom she had met in an international anti-slavery convention in London. They couldn't sit in the general crowd together. In the spring of 1840, while on her honeymoon, the two women became allies when the male delegates attending the convention voted that women should be denied participation in the proceedings, even if they, like Mott, had been nominated to serve as official delegates of their respective abolitionist societies. After considerable debate, the women were required to sit in a roped-off section hidden from view of the men in attendance. They were soon joined by prominent abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, who arrived after the vote had been taken and, in protest of the outcome, refused his seat, electing instead to sit with the women. So good on you, William. Mott's example and the decision to prohibit women from participating in the convention strengthened Stanton's commitment to women's rights. By 1848, her early life experiences, together with the experience in London and her initially debilitating experience as a housewife, she found it boring, in Seneca Falls, galvanized Stanton. She later wrote, "The general discontent I felt with women's portion as wife, housekeeper, physician, and spiritual guide, the chaotic conditions into which everything fell without her constant supervision, and the wearied, anxious look of the majority of women, impressed me with a strong feeling that some active measures should be taken to remedy the wrongs of society in general and of women in particular. My experience at the World Anti-Slavery Convention, all I had read of the legal status of women and the oppression I saw everywhere, together swept across my soul, intensified now by many personal experiences. It seemed as if all the elements had conspired to impel me to some outward step. I could not see what to do or where to begin. My only thought was a public meeting for protest and discussion." In 1848, acting on these feelings and perceptions, Stanton joined Mott, her sister Martha Coffin Wright, and a handful of other women in Seneca Falls. Together, they organized the first women's rights convention held in Seneca Falls, July 19 and 20. So that is the motives. Let me show you just a few pictures, and then, we look at what they actually wrote, which I'm hoping you find both enlightening and amusing. So this is what's left of the building that they met in. It doesn't have a roof anymore, and it's now it's a historic site. So this roof is put on just to preserve sort of the interior, but not to try to replicate. Here's another view of it, and I'm guessing that there are events held outside because those look like seats to me. So, but this is the hall that the meeting was actually held in, and here is the signatures to the Declaration of Sentiments. So these are all the people who signed it. And this is an actual program from it. And here are the gentlemen. So there's actually a good number of men that are here as well. And right there is Frederick Douglass's name. And anyway, so Lucretia Mott, Harriet Cady Eaton, there's Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and all of these women were there, which is radical for them to do at this time. I mean, quite radical. And there's, I guess, a picture of the events. And this is a 3-cent postage stamp, which was issued in 1948, 100 years of progress of women. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Carrie Catt, and Lucretia Mott on that stamp. And these are suffragists that continued the fight and had to keep going for another 60 years. No, 70 years beyond this. And this is Elizabeth Cady Stanton with 2 of her 7 children. And here are statues of the men. And I actually like the way that these women are not just standing looking noble, but talking to one another. And we're going to read this from the original. Headquarters, National Association opposed to women's suffrage. And I think it's funny that there are 5 guys standing here. And this woman sort of looking back. There were a lot of women actually who had completely internalized their role, who agreed that women should not vote. So part of the work of women in the suffrage movement is convincing other women that, yes, you really should have the right to vote. And here's some cartoons of the day. This is parodies to what will happen if we give women the right to vote. Well, she's got her thing, saying, I'm off to go do an official function. And oh my gosh, he's having to stay behind with the babies and they're not happy about it. And what is a suffragette without a suffering household? So when she becomes a suffragette, the household suffers. Oh my. And she's saying ta-ta. And this is, right, totally playing on stereotypes. Suffragette vote getting the easiest way. If you just shower your man with kisses and hugs, of course he'll let you do this, right? So be compliant while getting, as a way of getting your way here. So revealing a common attitude of the period. So all of that is set up for the Declaration of Sentiments, which was the concluding document that everyone signed, that all those people signed, saying what they thought should happen. And for that, I'm going to go right to my Canvas page. So this is it right here. So the Declaration of Seneca Falls Convention, using the model of the Declaration of Independence, forthrightly demanded the rights of women as right-bearing individuals. So I'll read this down for you, but then it actually, just like the Declaration of Independence, it gives a couple paragraphs explaining what the problem is, what the issue that they're focusing on. And then in the same way that the Declaration of Independence says, let proofs be shown to a candid world so you can see why we're making this argument, they do exactly the same thing. They bullet point all of their grievances. So when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one portion of the family of man to assume among the people of earth, instead of the nations of earth, a position different from that which they have hitherto occupied, but one to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires they should declare the causes that impel them to such a course. We hold these truths to be self-evident. You knew it was coming, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That is lifted, that is word for word from the Declaration of Independence. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. Again, this is all a direct quote. But when a long train of abuses, usurpations pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them, meaning women, under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward women, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. Number one, we can't vote. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights, which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. Let me read that again. He has withheld from her rights, which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. In other words, we get less than the lowest guy. Having deprived her of this first right of a citizen, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation, he has oppressed her on all sides. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. In other words, if married, she has no civil rights. They all go to her husband. He has taken from her all right in property, even to the wages she earns. They go to her husband. He has made her morally an irresponsible being, and she can commit many crimes with impunity, provided they be done in the presence of her husband. In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming, to all intents and purposes, her master. The law giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and to administer chastisement. Administering chastisement is a very polite way of saying he can beat her legally, and there is no legal recourse for the woman. So, giving him power to deprive her of her liberty and even physically harm her. He has so framed the laws of divorce as to what shall be the proper causes, and in case of separation, to whom the guardianship of the children shall be given, as to be wholly regardless of the happiness of women. The law in all cases going upon a false supposition of the supremacy of man and giving all powers into his hands. After depriving her of all rights as a married woman, if single and the owner of property, he has taxed her to support a government which recognizes her only when her property can be made profitable to it. So in other words, if you're single and you own property, you're going to be taxed, but your money goes to a government that doesn't recognize you in any other way. He has monopolized nearly all the profitable employments. So in other words, all the good jobs, all the interesting jobs are men. And from those she is permitted to follow, she receives but scanty remuneration. That's the pay, scanty wages. He closes against her all the avenues to wealth and distinction, which he considers most honorable to himself. As a teacher of theology, medicine, or law, she is not known. In other words, she cannot teach theology, medicine, or law because she's not allowed to get degrees in those things. He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He allows her in church as well as state, but a subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry and, with some exceptions, from any public participation in the affairs of the church. These are not a short list. These are all the complaints. He has created a false public sentiment by giving to the world a different code of morals for men and women, by which moral delinquencies which exclude women from society are not only tolerated, but deemed of little account in man. So in other words, the different moral codes, women are put on this pedestal and told, don't move. Stay on this high pedestal of virtue and submission. But guys, you can wander around, and it's not only tolerated, but it's kind of deemed not a big deal when guys do that. But women, don't you dare. He has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it as his right to assign for her a sphere of action when that belongs to her conscience and to her God. He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. Now, in view of this entire disenfranchisement of one half of the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of the United States. And that is a very articulate and forceful declaration of sentiments. That's what was published in 1848 and signed by all of those individuals who you saw on the list. So 1848, the very first women's rights conference. And that's a head full. I'm kind of curious what your reactions are with that. Are you guys pissed off? Are you, ready to go march in the streets? I'm kind of curious how you guys feel about that. And you can put it in the chat if you want. Anybody want to go back to 19th century? I don't like housework. Yeah, no, I'm good. So a couple of things I want you to think about. I'm not going to give you the assignment. The assignment, we're going to read a letter. This will be on, and if you want to go ahead, I've already posted it in Canvas, so you can read ahead if you want. But there's another women's rights conference that happens 2 years later in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is not that far away from Seneca Falls. And that conference spurred a gentleman to write a letter to a New York newspaper. And the letter is a really, really clear example of the popular belief of what a woman's role should be. And it's, of course, written by a man. And so you'll see that this is a really widespread and popular and common belief, and earnestly felt. So I want you to think about that. That letter was written in 1850. The Seneca Falls Convention is 1848. And yet, think about this. The Equal Rights Amendment was proposed several times in the 20th century, went almost nowhere the first couple of times. When I was in high school in the 70s, so that dates me, when I was in high school in the mid 70s, the ERA, as it was known, the Equal Rights Amendment, it was only 3 short sentences. Basically, women shall be entitled to all rights and privileges of full citizenship, full stop. Nobody may discriminate based on gender, full stop. And Congress shall have the power to make laws to enact this. That's it. That's all it said. It seems completely non-controversial. Like duh. It did not pass. It did not pass. It got one freaking state short of being adopted. And I think it was Illinois. And if Illinois had said yes, then it would have been one of the newest amendments to the Constitution. It did not pass. It failed. It still has not passed. So I want you to think about the era we're in right now with Black Lives Matter protests happening still, and a mirror being held up to us, mostly through videos taken by these things, which has graphically shown us that yes, we do have inequalities in how the law sees us, primarily based on race, but also on gender. And so we've come a long way, and yet in some ways we still have a long ways to go. And I want you just to reflect on the fact that it has been 170 years since Seneca Falls. Women do have the right to vote now. And, now we have a woman of color who is going to be our vice president. And we almost had a woman president. So we've come a long way, and yet our attitudes, in some ways, we looked at the very beginning of the year at what men make on average, what white men make, what African American men make, what white women make, and what African American women make. And it goes down just like that. The men, even though this is unequal, the men top the women, and white women still are in third place. So if you want to think about how you can apply yourself to social change, there's some pretty ripe topics that you can think about. So it's almost 9:30. Like I said, I'm going to save the assignment, and I'm going to give you guys, we'll go through the letter, and I'm going to give you guys time you can do the homework assignment probably within the class time. So do you guys have any questions for now? Are you good? Okay, so I'm going to let you guys go, and have a great weekend. And then we'll have one more week before winter break and the solstice, and daylight slowly starts to get longer. So I'll see you guys on Monday. Okay. And ciao. Stay safe.